edition book club.
It
It
is.
I love that so much. I'm so excited. Normally, book club is, third Sunday of the month, and, it's steampunk. But today we have special edition book club. So I am Madame Askew. This is my delightful comrade in comedy, the Grand Arbiter, and our very esteemed, wonderful guest, Madame Gail Carriger.
Hello. I'm very proud to be here. Very excited.
We're very excited.
Delighted.
We have been consuming your media for a very long time. For a very, very long time. And we have recently gotten three new additions to your Tinkered Star universe.
Yes.
Which we consumed at a voracious pace.
Excellent.
Yes, we did.
It was like Madame Askew had seen a plate of shumai.
No shumai is safe, and no Tinkered Stars book remains unconsumed. I have read all of them at this point. Very excited. And I'm so excited to discuss them with you today. My darlings who are watching, please speak up. Please share to your personal pages and remind people to come and chat with us. And if you have questions, this is very important, we will be watching for them. But it's important that you do that thing that Madame Gail has you do. Put a question mark at the front of your question.
Like a
so
little
we can
ladle.
See it. Like a ladle.
Like a little upside down ladle.
Yes, we love ladles.
We love ladles. Ladles are very exciting. I too have shared, so I'm hoping people are here and interested in chatting about books.
Okay.
And book stuff.
And we support you all, and we understand that some folks don't like spoilers. We will be talking about all of the contents of all of the books.
Yes.
So if you haven't finished yet, we'll let you know as best we can, but be aware that spoilers abound and we make no promises.
Right.
And honestly, and this is my opinion, and you as a writer may have a different opinion.
Oh, here we go already.
But
it begins.
We're-
it does
we're getting
begin.
down.
It's already begun.
It's already begun.
Our friendship is merely that. It's an illusion to let this begin. No, but I'm of the opinion that if a book or piece of media can be spoiled, the media is weaker for it.
Oh, interesting.
So if it can be spoiled,
How philosophical we're getting immediately.
I'm sorry. It's like I have a background.
Women, ball, and philosophy, Grand Arbiter. So, here's the thing.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
All right. You've got to
Because
reply.
I have thoughts.
Oh, good. Excellent.
And my thoughts are, as the social scientist in the room, not the philosopher,
Yes. Oh, good.
that we've researched this. And it turns out the act of spoiling something, pop culturally speaking, mostly doesn't actually spoil people's enjoyment of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mean.
So far as we can test.
Right.
Is that if it can be spoiled,
If it can be ruined.
if it can be ruined by spoilage, maybe it wasn't that good to begin with.
Yes. The twist was all it hung on, then yes.
M. Night
And are we
Shyamalan-
alluding to certain
Well,
things?
Maybe we are.
But we don't want to throw shade.
No. Well, I mean, I did.
Maybe a little shade.
Just a tiny bit.
I mean, the
tiny shades.
there is definitely some value in, of course, we want to respect everyone else's opinions on the matter, of
Yes.
course, but to be honest, the reality is we're going to talk about this book.
Yes,
And
all three.
All
three.
three of them. And the real reality of it is I can never remember what is in each book once I've spit out an entire series. So if we tried to talk about the first one and just spoil that one, I would probably spoil all the rest of them anyway because they're all one big muddle in my
You
head.
can't.
I can't keep it straight.
You've extruded so much in
This
such a
was
short
all
amount of time.
vomited forth. 200,000 words or whatever it was.
Just on a
Glorious.
just on a plate.
Glorious 200,000
So
words.
for those.
Before we get into it,
Okay.
hello everyone.
Hello,
We
everyone.
do have a lot of wonderful people joining us. So I want to call out Anne Curry from Windy, North Wales. Thank you. We appreciate you. And all of your phonings. And since linguistics is going to be part of my questions
Probably
about
will be
this book, I'm very excited to have a Welsh person amongst our number.
Yeah.
It
we
must be
also-
very. Is it late or early?
Late.
Well,
early.
Early? Late? I mean, at a certain point, it all wraps around itself.
8 to 9 hours ahead. So very, very late.
Late.
Wow, you're up late. Are you
Thank
Are you a night owl?
Thank
I hope
you.
you're a night owl.
We're just
And,
glad that you're here, and we respect the hustle, as it were.
Yeah, thank you. And also the phone
And the hussies. You respect the hussies
Oh,
too.
I respect the hussies so much. Hussies respect hussies.
It's a mantra.
It's a mantra. So
That will need to be some swag. Hutsies.
Respect hussies. Hussies respecting hussies.
But you know,
And hustle.
we do respect hussies and hustle here. It's true. We are gloveless hussies. And we respect the hustle you brought to your books.
Oh, thank you.
But you know, my favourite bits, I mean, this is actually inaccurate because I love so many parts, there isn't a single favourite. But you did mention the social scientists.
Yes.
We did dive into this arena immediately. There's a lot of social sciences you're bringing to this science fiction.
Yes.
There's hard science in
A
that
little bit, not much.
they're out in space and spaceships doing spacey things.
It's a bit hand wavy, I admit.
I mean, here's the
favorite.
thing. What I think is actually really great is that and again, this is my opinion. You can do with it as you will. The strongest sci-fi books do lend themselves, the social sciences lend themselves better to sci-fi as the science part of the fiction, because there doesn't need to be that much hand-waving in terms of, you don't have to hand-wave like, well, they can go faster than light because of X.
Yeah.
And ultimately, some of that technology is less interesting because they don't lean into the social sciences component of it, because there's not like because as a material scientist, you know, technology is social in nature,
yeah,
and technology informs culture and culture informs technology.
Yes.
And so it's very difficult for me to read and enjoy some sci-fi books because they're so heavily invested in their approach to being really accurate about the current science on dark matter, that they don't do a lot of thinking about what that would mean for the cultures that have access to that technology, or what that technology actually means to them.
And this is not to slag, because I do love some of the sort of historical core hard sci-fis, but this has always been one of my kind of axes to grind in sci-fi, is that I really want the social structure to be thought about with as much care as the hard science side of the equation. And also, I think the archaeologist in me comes to the fore as well. You need to think very carefully about how the pop culture and the aspects of like setting and place are also informed by whatever technology you invent. And so a classic example I always give is from the fantasy genre, but for example, if you have mages and those mages have firepower, that's kind of the equivalent, you know, like fireballs or whatever, that's the equivalent to the cannon having been invented at perhaps a different other technological setting point. And so you need to have castles with like star-shaped barbicans and things like that. And so it's kind of one of the ways my brain works is being like, if I'm going to construct this culture and this language, then they're going to have this kind of spaceship. So for me, they sort of all inform each other, but that also ties to like dress and modes of address and like form, and like all of these things to me are very intimately linked when you're whole cloth inventing alien species, for example, or advanced human species and how they might have evolved in different places. And I feel when I'm reading some of the older sci-fi, hard sci-fi in particular, that aspect has sort of been neglected, that it's all very well to push humanity into space, but we culturally also change as a result of the context.
Yeah, there's all this, like one of the biggest, and this is a criticism that I have of Star Trek, heaven forbid.
Right.
But one of the biggest challenges with Star Trek is that most of the art that we experience is all from the 20th century. So it's like all of these future people they're like, oh yes, we love the holodeck, but the only way we can imagine it is to play out stories and concepts from the 20th century. Like, of course, we're going to do Robin Hood or
Sherlock Holmes.
Or Sherlock Holmes. It's not, we're going to, like, it doesn't push the boundary of what, it doesn't extrapolate to the most extreme concept. Like, there's some, like, obvious, the technology is sort of like, it is technology that is in the future, but trapped in the trimmings of the 20th century. And you're just like, oh, okay, well, it makes it so it's more relatable to me conceptually as a person, but it's not particularly realistic. Like, I'm okay with that because it's Star Trek and I will give it a pass. But it's a problem that this technology is sort of fully like the pop culture, the culture is so fully divorced from, like, it didn't move forward. Like, they socially moved to a different place, and technology has moved very, very aggressively towards the future, but they've done so at the abandonment of all other forms of art. And, like, Lord Asplin, I've talked a lot about how the way that the Star Trek universe deals with, like, things like cooking, things that would be, like, technologically not valuable in the same way, but, like, still kind of important from a deep cultural perspective, is very weird, because they treat things like cooking or doing art as sort of like hobbies that one might do rather than like a thing that people devote their lives to.
Yeah. That's an interesting way of thinking about it.
Whereas you, in your book, are definitely plumbing those steps.
Yes.
Of how the technology and the culture have entwined and powered the movement forward of your stories.
It's an interesting thing to think about, particularly in the context of sort of the different kinds of pop culture's presentations of science fiction. Because, like, not to get immediately extremely meta, but the interesting thing about something like Star Trek is that a bunch of creative people are acting in it and writing it and doing all of those things. But their own art form that is producing this art is trivialized by the art form.
Yes.
Like, I don't know how else to put it, right? Like, it's marginalized.
Yeah, there's no TV in the future.
Right, there's no Star Trek for Star Trek.
Yes. There's also, like, arguably no new books or any kind of, like...
You never meet the current best-selling author in Star Trek Landia.
Yeah. And part of
the famous pop star in Star Trek
Right.
Landia.
No, there are no pop stars. A real loss.
A real
for
loss.
Star Trek. Star Trek, if you're listening,
Pop stars are
yeah,
your weakness.
you need them. And so I want to dive into some of our questions here.
Yes,
They're
let's
starting
do
to
it.
happen.
I'm already going to strip because it's already getting warm.
I will
But
take this
I
from
want
you.
everybody to know that I went with the purple color theme for a while. And
You
then-
did. You're very strong.
So
You're very noble.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
wonderful. We were like purple for the books.
And I must admit,
good.
I blanched because my one really nice purple dress is very much a summer dress, and so I could not wear it.
No.
So-
You were looking wonderful in your cardi there.
Thank you.
So good.
Although Madame Askew still needs her full Muppet
For
to
the
protect
moment.
herself.
I
the
would like to
moment.
keep my cardi just in case.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
thank
You
you.
might need it.
I am one of those people who I have no internal temperature regulation, so I will immediately cold and immediately hot and immediately cold and immediately hot and immediately cold.
Okay.
I feel that.
Yes.
I
So
do.
question.
All right. So
Question.
first question from Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. Tracy, A++. Excellent question. Why does the rest of the galaxy agree that the singers are gods just because the Dicey say they are? And Madam,
Oh,
this is a book. There is an answer in book 3 that we do get to.
True.
But would you like to speak to this a little bit?
well, this is one of those things where you're like applying reason to fiction, but also why have we all agreed that we call K-pop idols idols? As in the golden idols.
Right.
That seems to be something we've all just accepted.
Yes.
If you're in the K-pop world. That's how language works, everybody. The words we use now are not going to mean the same thing in 5 years, let alone, I mean, just look at what happens on the internet.
Right.
Let alone in 50. Like, within the last 5 years, the word stan has taken on an entirely new
Oh
meaning.
my goodness!
For example.
So wild how that has shifted.
Yeah.
Stan is a great example.
I think the other component for this, for me at least, when I was reading the piece, is also that the nature of godhood is imbued in the language.
Yeah.
So like there's this sort of like whether or not what does it mean to be divine and what it means to be worshipped is something that is very like defined by the context.
Yeah.
And so when we think about these kinds of things like standing and all these like cultural components, there is like deep worship going
Yes.
on there.
Yeah.
Whether or not we use those words. And I think you're just writing what it says on the tin.
Yeah, I wanted to correlate the experience of going to a concert extremely closely to the experience of going to a barn raising, say, in the 1940s or something. This idea that part of the experience of art, when that art is performative, is a communal experience.
Yes.
And I think we've all experienced, if you've gone to a comedy show or to a very funny movie or something like that, where because other people are laughing more and enjoying it more, it actually impacts you and how much you enjoy it.
Absolutely.
But that is only the beginning of the sort of shared euphoric experience of something like concert going that is not dissimilar to something like worship in a religious environment. A mass, for example, or wedding ceremony.
Or a tent revival.
Well, and the way, and I did not go because I am not one of, I would never stop a Swiftie from getting access to tickets for obvious reasons. She's lovely, don't need to block anyone else's access to tickets. But there is a lot of ways in which those communities describe the experience in the same way you might describe going
Euphoria.
to Mecca.
Or religious euphoria.
Yeah, like it is, they describe it as
Epiphany
and being connected to a community,
Yeah.
and that community component is tied to this individual person who they have waited all of their hopes and dreams on, which is like such an intense thing.
It's very intense. And what do we have as a global unifying force now but celebrities, right? But these major celebrities. In a way, I mean, you could make the case that there are more fans of BTS, for example, on a global scale than there is a population in South Korea. But that's quite apart from the fact that they're probably more than many religions have.
Indeed.
Or Taylor Swift, for example, even more, right?
Yes.
And that says something profound about the experience of relating to celebrity and the experience of relating to celebrity as an individual, but also on a group scale.
Yes.
And the celebrity's power over that group and the activation and that parasocial relationship and the feedback and the way they impact each other is something that I find very fascinating and interesting to unpack and very psychological, because it does seem to be one of these universally shared experiences, whether it's taking a religious form or whether it's taking an idolic celebrity form. This idea that we have a propensity to glorify the individual who has an extreme talent in a way that elevates them to godhood. And the Dicey are just very honest about it.
They have embraced it.
They just decided they would do it. And it is, in its way, a kind of cult movement, and it within the context of my books, and that's what I mean to explore. Yeah. And that's why I use those terms from the writer.
I love that. I love that. And also the sort of, something we talked about briefly, the Grand Arbiter and I, was the sort of cultural imperialism that's happening from the Dicey.
Because
Yes.
the Dicey are what was it called? I used a term to describe it. It was like
They're myopic.
They're myopic in their worldview, and they are supremacists of their own culture.
Yeah.
They believe, whether or not that's true or not, because the book leaves it up to interpretation, which I appreciate.
Make your decision, yes.
That the Dicey believe their culture is not just the right way, but the superior way and the only way.
Yeah.
And that anything else is literal blasphemy because they believe their actions are divine in nature.
Yeah.
Well, they can't. I mean, we see this a lot in book 3, in Dome 6, as we're going to Agate. We see that they simply cannot imagine anyone not getting on board
With the premise. Yes, exactly.
And we do learn in that book why
Yes.
they consider that to be unimaginable, that anyone would not get on board.
Exactly. Why would you not want this? Why would you not want to invite it to your planet? And we watch the choice being, and you watch the people who have unwittingly become proselytizers of this, the performers, try to decide how they feel about that, right? That's the whole crux of the sort of moral quandary in the last book. But this is also, I'm doing this with the Dicey in particular, because of the age that these dicey are, right? That you learn. This is many of the spoilers are coming out now,
Yes,
right? Like it turns out that the dicey that are active and out in the universe and advocating for the Divinity and members of the Divinity are essentially teenagers. They're sort of prepubescent teenagers. They are not asexualized. They have no sexual identity yet, but that they're essentially the teenagers of their race. They're in that life stage. And that they believe this with the wholehearted confidence of teenagers.
Yes, they do.
Right? We were just talking about this recently, where we were talking about how when you are a teenager, everything is more black and white. And part of getting through that and into your 20s is learning that the world is a little bit more grayscale than that. But this is an entire species interacting at this life stage with this kind of mentality. So that is also part of it, is that they have this sort of profound belief that is held with all of the confidence of a teenager with a belief. And also, I am using them to showcase the obsession of fandom.
Yes.
Right? You cannot tell a dicey that the Divinity is flawed, much in the way that you cannot tell a Swiftie that Taylor Swift isn't that great of a singer.
Right.
I don't, trust me, I don't necessarily believe that. I hold no opinions whatsoever. But I have to be terrified about making that statement because of what the fandom would do.
Right.
And you should be terrified of making that statement to a dicey because of what the dicey might do. Now, they're not violent.
No.
So that makes a whole different sort of complexity to this.
They'll probably look at you in a very displeased
They
way.
might take the domes away from you or something like that. But no, they would never do that. The whole idea is to spread the domes.
So, we have some more questions.
We do. So, TK, hello, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you here in our space. We're so glad to be here. We'd like you to come visit because we think you're cute and adorable and perfect.
They are perfect, and we're happy to have them. So, TK asks, how did you get the idea for the gods' little stamp things they use as signatures of the autograph lines? One of my favorites. Not that we do autographs, but I have witnessed the autograph line.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? No, I can't remember exactly how that arrived, but I'm pretty sure it's just to do with the huge controversy, which I've neatly not been involved with. So, code of silence, everybody. I mean, this is on the internet, but where there are a lot of authors who have to sign, as I have had to in the past, something like 10,000 books at a time or something like that. And your hand literally dies when you do that. You just can't keep signing like that. And so authors have rolled out signature stamps. And so they will, stamp the books with a signature. And there are certain elements of obsessive fandom that really thinks this inauthenticizes the signature. They don't like it. There's something about the actual act of pen holding and crippling yourself in order to do this signature is very important to the fan.
Your suffering is what they desire.
It's what they want. They want you to suffer. And there are authors who are like, no, I just can't do that anymore. And so the authors have then done things like made specialty signature stamps for specific events.
Oh my goodness.
And like it's just it's this sort of weird war of technological attrition. I will say again, because I feel like I have to, that I always sign all of my things by hand. But that's just because I don't yet quite suffer from that. But I'd like the option open, please. But I think that was probably in the back of my head when that happened, and that's just a little throwaway thing where I was like, haha, let's have a commentary on what's blowing up.
Okay.
Yes, what's blowing up author fandom at the moment. Let's also just put a little poke at that. It's me. There's a lot of moments where I'm poking at current events as well as future events.
I love that. It's a wonderful throwaway that, honestly, as a person who goes to author signings, who has occasionally had to sign something, that sounds really nice. Once you hit a dozen, it's an awful lot.
Also, and I say this with absolute truth, the idea of picking up a big old stamp and going whackam on my own books for people is deeply kind of exciting. And slam the books. So that also really appeals.
See, then
although then I'm going to get carpal tunnel in my shoulder or something.
At that point, then you build up until you build the stamping machine.
Oh my god! And you just have a thing that you do.
It's a lot like we do with grommets and corsets.
Yes. It's very satisfying.
I
love a clunk moment.
So let's do the next comment.
So our next question, hello Cindy, is from Captain Cynthia, who says, was there any character in the series that ended up very different than you envisioned when you started the series?
Oh, what a good question.
That is an excellent question. I am curious about that.
Can you guess? Can you guess who might have changed the most?
Kaji?
Yes!
Yeah.
You got it!
Yes,
Very
Kaji.
good!
He's not as central in the first book or the
Right.
second book, and he is
vital by the third.
arguably the most important character
Yeah.
other than the lead at that point.
Yeah. So Kaji started out as the main girl character. Like, essentially, he was meant to be this sort of throwaway character who was very talented, that was just there to sort of needle as a little bit of a plot device and some social, you know, excuse for being witty, both from him and from Vex.
Yeah.
And then I was like, no, I want an enemies to lovers, but they're not actually lovers. I want enemies to friends, which is one of my like favorite tropes.
I love
is
that trope.
Like,
So good.
Kaji is just like doing it for his own reason, and he's a bitch. Right?
Oh, he's so bitchy.
He is very prickly, and I love this about him. As a writer, it is incredibly fun to write, but obviously hiding deep pain and you know feelings of rejection and all of this.
I have to confess something.
Okay.
Kaji is my favorite.
Yes.
So
a little burnt marshmallow.
I think the biggest thing for me is I don't think I could. I found that I was not able to actually pick a character that I liked the most. I liked.
Now you know my problem.
I mean, it's also for me. This is going to sound really cheesy, so be prepared.
Okay, all right.
The song of the six of them is the point, and so that's what I got from it.
Yes.
So like all of them together, I can see them like. My biggest walkaway and my largest disappointment is that I wanted Kaji moments for all of them. And you couldn't do, like, obviously, there's limited number of books. So you can't do it.
Although hope springs eternal. Hope
Yes.
springs eternal.
Yeah.
But the fact is that all of the characters, like, I found it really interesting because Fernanda, is that the Fandina gets a lot less time in the third book compared to the rest, but Jinsen gets like a huge like a huge lift in the last book.
Just in the last, and honestly,
in the last
they probably have the same amount of actual sentences and page time, but Jin Yaisen becomes this very important symbol for facts, right? Because the series is written from his perspective, so it's like, but that's the flow of friendship groups as well. It's like you flow in and out of who's like super important to you and who's most beloved at the time.
I think it's interesting because Jin is the most critical by the end of the Daisy and the Divinity, where that's not really going to happen for Fernanda.
Fandina. Well, Fandina is going to be significant because Fandina is the leader. In terms of like the face of the group and the sort of the presence of the group for the Divinity, right? Fandina has the most aggression for a Dicey. Jin Yaisen is like the nerd, right? He's the hacker element of our little cadre, right? The explainer and the info dumper and the person. And so Jin Yaisen was always going to be set, because Jin Yaisen is the first one who reaches out to Fex's, right? Like Jin Yaisen intentionally enters Fex's domain, but does not interfere with it.
Right.
And that's this sort of, that's in the very first book. And
Such
that's
a
this
lovely
sort of moment of you getting to see kind of the good side of the Divinity. This idea that they're going out and doing something intentional to people, but also they really want to understand. They want to make friends, right? They want to collect people in a strange way. They want to bring them into the cult. They want to love them and be with them, but also they have this sort of gentility of spirit.
Well, and the point isn't like it's cultural domination, obviously, but there is this whole component to it, which is like it's not colonialism as we normally see it, right? The goal is very much, and we've talked about this, it's very paternal.
It's
incredibly paternal in a way that is like,
we know what's best for you.
We know what's best for you. And that is, most colonialism uses that as a framework.
Of course.
But the Daisy actually believe it.
They really believe it.
And I think that's the difference.
And one of the points is, it might actually be what's best for you.
It might be true.
And it might, for some planets in particular, it might actually save them, right? It might actually be the win. It might actually
The only way to victory.
The only way to victory, or the only way to survival. And so, are they wrong? Is this great? We don't know, right? Like but this is me having a dialogue specifically with soft power. Yeah. So, one of the things I got very much into, which sort of sparked all of this, was K-pop and Korean dramas. And the Hallyu Wave, which is a very intentional propaganda machine of soft power. And from a cultural, archaeological, anthropological perspective, I find it fascinating and somewhat admirable in the strength of its power as a manipulative device. Because I am a fiction author, and what do we do but manipulate strangers' emotions, right? That's my whole role, is to be a professional liar who causes you pain and joy and
so
laughter,
much weeping,
right?
So much heartache, so much joy.
And here's Korea doing that with music and with drama. And to watch them sort of take over generations of young people has been one of the sort of great joys of my latter years. And I had to figure out what was going on, and as a fiction writer, the way I do that is write it down and start exploring it. So what I wanted to do with the Dicey was specifically dream version of soft power.
Brilliantly done. Too.
Oh, thank you.
And, some of the characters are clearly seeking it, wanting it. And the people who come into the Divinity, who are auditioning, many of them are themselves teenagers.
Yes.
Very naive and also desirous of what they see as celebrity and soft power.
Yes.
We see that today in
do.
lots of mediums on the social
I desire
medias.
loads of soft power.
Yeah, of course.
I think
Influencer is like,
Yes.
there's another word that it didn't used to mean that. It gets what it means now.
Right.
The power of language.
I think we have a few more questions.
We do have a few more questions. So TK, again, A++, gold star. Is there an anti-Dicey / resistance element, like people fighting against the cultural imperialism of the Dicey and the gods?
Certainly possible, but it's pretty difficult if they've already got their mitts into your sector of space, isn't it?
Yes.
And how would you fight it? Like, this is the great question of human civilization. How do you combat propaganda? How do you combat misinformation, if it's misinformation? If you are a spin doctor, how do you combat truth? If truth is your enemy, and so how do you fence with a jellyfish when that jellyfish is fabulous and sparkly and giving you the greatest entertainment experience of your life?
You know who is fighting back against it a bit? Fex and Miss It.
Yeah.
And with their duet, that is a little bit of a...
Art with art. They fight art with art.
They fight art with art. They're like, this is beautiful art, but there's also other beautiful, valid art we should not lose sight of. And I like how you handled that. It is, as a performer, I was like, ooh, tell me more.
Yeah.
So juicy. But you also worked it in beautifully as a through line that this ultimately changes and elevates the art. So then they think they're sort of, being a little bit edgy, but honestly, the Dicey are just like, let's wrap a tentacle around that.
Yes.
There's no way there's no way for them to win in some ways, because any success they have elevates the divinity. So there's no way for them to, because you can't fight it within.
No.
And you can't fight outside of it, because forming a faction of people who are like, well, these people are like, what's the argument? What is the bad thing they're doing? Yes, there is some mental control going on here.
Things.
There's things that are changing. Is that bad? And that's a really hard question to answer, because in many ways, we're not saying that people have lost interest in doing things. They're actually not even stopping people from like living their lives in any kind of way. It's really just, well, there's less violence. There's just less.
You're just hurting each other less.
And that is...
Well, I mean, but that is the reason I set it up this way, and the question that the question that I am posing to the universe is, isn't that the power of art? That it changes your mind in some way, in some small way. The power of a piece of poetry, or the power of a performance, or the power of humor. and subversion, isn't that what it actually does?
Yeah, no,
right?
I mean, we can talk about how the ways in which, like, we're seeing that with the propaganda that you're mentioning, but we're also seeing that in sort of the way in which people like, the presence of queer people in media, for example, has eroded a lot of the misconceptions of those people. Is that mind control? Like,
well, some people might claim that.
Yes,
Yeah.
like, I think that's a real, like, really you have to ask this question of, like, but then you also get this component of, like, well, if it's mental control because it's like a drug, there are lots of drugs that we take to make us better.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
mental health drugs and things like that. Is this not, like, a better Lexapro? I think that's a really complicated conversation.
So complicated. But also, why do you think countermeasures want to control the arts? Like, why do you think when fascists or extreme socialists or extreme democracies or extreme communists seize power, the first thing they go after is art, right? Because it has this fencing with jellyfish amorphous power that if you let it just be, you're not quite sure what is going to happen with it. You're not quite sure what it's going to do. You can't control it. You can try, and watching Korea weaponize it and give it this college try has been very, very fascinating. But, you know, these are all the kinds of questions that I'm unpacking with these books, and I wanted to talk about.
There was a second part of that question I actually was found very interesting.
Go.
I don't know who was asking it. I saw it.
TK.
No, there was another question that was tied to this one.
Right. So Tracy asks,
that's the other part.
Without giving too much away, can you? We're not worried, Tracy. We've already spoiled some things. Spoiled some things. I don't think we've spoiled anything. Can you explain the difference between someone experiencing God fix and someone being fixed?
Well, that's the two sides of the coin, right? So God fix is the actual epiphany, euphoric experience of art. And some of you may have experienced it and some of it may not. But it is I would liken it to something like seeing a painting in person and just bursting into tears, right? Or this, like, profound feeling when you read a book and you finish that book that you never want to leave it. That you're like, oh, I'm never going to get this, like, I call this book letdown syndrome, which is when you finish a really good book and you're like, man, I love it, and I know I can reread it, but I never get to experience it again for the first time. A really great movie can do that to you, too, where you're like, oh, man.
That magical first moment.
And these are things that mostly only art can do for you, right? And the God fix is that, but kind of like with other people around you and kind of just, and people get this sort of trance-like state at concerts and at sporting events, and in religious experiences, right? This is the kind of part of the brain is activated that will drive you to speak in tongues, that will drive you to, and it will drive you to this other place of obsession and madness, where the thing or the person who has caused that in you drives you to a kind of insanity. And this is parasocial relationships. It can be a character. I have a bunch of research on this. If you want to go to the Tinkered Starsong, sort of like all the bits of research that I did, there's quite a lot on parasocial relationships and what we know and don't know about the psychology of people involved in this. But the fixed are what happens when you become too obsessed with the creator of the art rather than the art that is created. And that drives humans in particular to a place where you get, in some cultures and with some genders in particular, you get people stalking and killing celebrities or kidnapping them and all of these things. And when we have an opportunity from a psychological perspective to interview these people afterwards and they're asked why they did it, most of the time what they say is that they want to be remembered by the celebrity. So which is a way of saying, I want to have meaning in that celebrity's life, even if it's negative.
Ugh.
And
that says something, like, that kind of thing gives me chills, right? That says something very profound about what art can do when it is corrupted by the human brain.
So one of the other questions that I thought was really interesting that I saw that blurred by, that was not the question, but that was a very good one, is the Daisy's unification as a culture. There's a sort of way in which they're very homogenous. Like, they're all on board with the divinity experience of the ones we see.
Yes.
And there's this whole framework of, is there people who disagree that the divinity is a good thing?
Well, there's some dismissive conversation about the nymphs, this life stage, who have chosen not to leave the planet.
Yes.
Which means which is coded for, and the way it's talked about, it says if they are not developed properly. They're not developing properly. They're not intellectually keeping up with the rest. But in reality, they've just chosen not to join the divinity.
Yeah.
And so those who are in the divinity literally question the sanity of the nymphs who have chosen not to do, because that means you stayed at home. That means you're still in your parents' basement, right? We question your life choices. The rest of the teenagers do. So there is, and that's a very subtle little thing.
Why are you a weird otaku living in your mom's house? What's going on?
Why did you stay on Dyson Prime? Who wants to stay on Dyson Prime? It's a terrible place.
Right.
Go out into the galaxy and
Just
spread
caves.
love. What are you
caves.
doing? Spread art.
Right.
Yeah. What are you? Why are you in STEM? What's going on?
They're in stems with tubers.
And then, of course, there's the attitude of the adults who are like, oh, you guys are playing with the galaxy. How cute. It's nothing to do with us. We have breeding to do. We have other shit to take care of. Whatever you want to do with your little human and other alien toys, we don't care. Just, don't get hurt. But they've figured out a way to go and expand and not get hurt. They figured out the way to do it.
They do.
Yeah.
And they're very successful.
Very successful.
So, Charity, Captain Charity, whom we all love, says, major spoilers question.
Oh, here we
That's
go.
fine,
We're here.
Charity.
What time are we? Well, we're right near the end, so we've now hit across. But we've already spoiled much.
Yeah.
Much has been spoiled.
So, Charity asks, the Carapace Stone Wall, what was the inspiration for that?
Oh yes, yes. I think Madame Askew and I have had bits of conversation about this, but I think many of us who grow up in geekdom, or perhaps many of us with artistic spirits, are also a little creepy.
Yes.
I like things a little creepy.
Yes.
And if you onboarded it to my fandom via Soulless, there was creepy, right?
Yes.
There was the original golem and with the thing on and the teeth, the weird square teeth, right? Like I'll go a little creepy. And that just the idea again, remember, archaeologist. So I'm used to going into and experiencing cultures where they put the bodies of children into the walls of their buildings. They put the bodies of teenagers under the floors of their building, and they exhume adults and their skeletons regularly so that they can have the heads to dinner. And this is just to say, different cultures are different about death than we are, or you are if you are tuning in from a different place. I just love the idea that it was the reflective form of the adult carapaces that spawned the whole thing, that the dead are made use of into an art form that originally was an instrument of control for war, and that became this other thing entirely.
Well, and there's this other component to it which I find deeply fascinating, which is the fact that it's
It's late.
Yeah, no, you'll.
So sorry.
You can't keep having caffeine.
We're a bad influence. We're like,
terrible
no, give us more.
So there's this whole component where it's also that it's so, what I find very likable about this is that it's so obvious. If you just look a little bit, it all plays out very obviously. The skin is the most important organ of the Daisy's culture.
From the beginning. Yeah.
And the idea that they would do anything but venerate it makes
At the
zero
end,
sense.
exactly.
There's no reason they would ever destroy or bury a body with skin on it.
But to understand that, you have to sympathize with the Daisy. You have to understand where they are coming from, which means it is obvious.
Maybe
but
a little creepy.
you have to be a little creepy, and you also have to get their culture, right?
Yeah.
So for some people, it is a total twist if you are too much in Fex's mind, or if you're too much sympathetic to Miss It, or to one of the other characters. It is a surprise. But to others, the seeds are definitely set up and dropped. But that is like one of my great pleasures as an author, is to throw things out that, some of which are seeded really well, some of which are seeded really sporadically, in an attempt to surprise you somehow, in some way.
Well, you always surprise me.
Oh, thank you.
But never because it's deliciously delightful. It's always, I'm always like, oh, of course it's great. Delightful. Amazing.
So, but this was a thing for me, reading along in the books, as we got into the second book. I was like, there's something going on the home planet with the way that the next stage of dicey existence is part of making the domes. But I had actually a much more Geigerian view of what was going on. And so whilst I was prepared for creepy, I'd actually gone much creepier.
Yes. Yeah.
So
well, that's true too.
Happy with
Yeah.
reviews.
Yeah, it felt to me like it would be like sort of standard sci-fi cop-out to make them evil and sort of intentionally trying to take over the galaxy. Like that seemed to me, I don't know, just not the way to go.
I also think it's...
I like the capriciousness of it.
I love the capriciousness.
But to put a pin in that, that's also me playing with mythology. So I'm very much a fan of the Greek gods in particular, who are very capricious gods. So if I'm going to create a divinity, there's going to be a bunch of teenagers acting like the Greek gods without the sex bit. But because gods are capricious as far as I'm concerned. And so Miss It is the obvious element, but he's not capricious at all, it turns out. It's just that Fex can't figure him out, right? It's just he's unpredictable.
Yeah.
But the Dicey are actually capricious teenage gods. I mean, the Greek gods always acted like teenagers to me.
They do.
I think that's one of the reasons we find and venerate and love them at like age 10 to 12, because we're about to enter that
Right.
teenager phase. Of course, we're sort of obsessed with Zeus and everybody mucking around. But
That's
anyway,
so cool.
so that's very intentional, that the part of the behavior pattern of them and their expansion is this capriciousness of godhood, which if you have that much power, I feel like if you hang out with the very, very wealthy, for example, they all kind of act a little
I mean,
bit like
and it's
this.
also like, it ties to that third book because it's their hubris that's ultimately their downfall in that particular context.
Or is it their downfall?
Well, I mean,
right?
in the sense that their hubris allows for great suffering to
Yes,
occur.
yes, that's true. Yes, that is true. Of which they do feel sort of profoundly guilty when they realize what has happened. Yeah.
They were not prepared.
I think that
So, I know you've got some thoughts, but I want to bring this in before you go into your thought, and then we're close to
we're
our
close to
end.
time.
So, you mentioned Miss It.
Yes.
And there's some discourse in the comments about Miss It. And the Grand Arbiter and I have had wonderful chat back and forth about who's Miss It, who's Fex, who's are we both sons, who we relate to more as performers. But I do want to talk about Miss It a little bit, because he's important inroad into the culture.
Yeah.
He was an abandoned child.
Yeah.
Abandoned by social scientists.
I know. For science, for research, we will embed our child in the system because we got to figure out how it works.
But then
Such
afterwards,
an academic thing to do.
but also afterwards, when we're bored of him, we'll just walk away.
And
Leave him
then,
there.
no, listen,
He's doing well. He's fine.
He's
Well,
fine.
Who cares?
No, he chose. He made his own choices at 10.
He's fine.
Okay.
I know.
Okay.
I know. But you know those academics. You know those academics. I mean, think about like now, but also in the past. Like psychologists who are like, I'll just raise my child this way, and just with no exposure to culture or whatever decision weird academics do weird things to the kids is what I'm saying. Most of the time.
I felt like it was a wonderful little commentary on social sciences, academics, because if you're in the social science, you have met that academic who would embed their child and be like, no, of of course, I wanted them to be like really good octopus speaker.
Very crunchy.
Yeah,
very crunchy
leave
mom.
them with the octopus.
Right.
Yeah, and this is also this is a theme that again you'll see in a lot of my books, which is evil in the pages of my books, if it's in person and not a natural disaster of some kind, is always obsession. Whether that obsession is with science, as it is in the very first book with the Hippocrates Club,
Yes.
whether that obsession is with social science, as it is with the parents of this book, whether that obsession is with religion, as it is in, say, Blameless, for
Yes.
example, with the Templars. So it is always, to me, and of course, as it is with the fixed, like what happens to the to the most obsessed of the fans, they go crazy. We get Sessing fans, we get murder fans, right?
Yeah.
So like obsession is the almost always the evil within the pages that I'm trying to unpack, because I, as a nerdy geeky person, will become obsessed with stuff myself. And now I have a little danger thing that goes on, but it's really hard to resist becoming obsessed with something that you love.
Right, because it's a wonderful gilded path as you're going along, and then next thing you know, you've gone all the
You've
way.
embedded your 10-year-old
All the-
child in an alien
Yes.
race without consequence.
And you should go. You should.
We're gonna.
I'm about to rant. So
We're gonna
you should
pull
dive in.
out. So I do want to use these last 10 minutes to focus on something specific. I know there's lots of other questions. What we'll do is we'll try to get.
We can go a little long if we
Yeah.
want, and we'll do like a quick fire round or something.
Yes,
fire rounds.
but I want to spend a few minutes to do a sort of deep dive into your greatest love in terms of tropes, the found family.
The found family.
Our favorite.
Which is kind of the defining feature of this piece is family, is
Yes.
like, and not just family, a family you've chosen,
Yes.
but also family that you found through, machination.
Your work.
Yeah.
Your
And
job.
I think that is something that I think is very, like, it's the necessary and required piece for every piece of queer media
Yes.
on the planet.
Yes.
You're not allowed to do queer stuff if there's not found family, because you always find them, regardless.
That's the point.
Yes. And I wanted to sort of get into if you felt that you could, is there characters that you felt, is there things about that dynamic that you wish you had more time to develop?
Oh,
Between
you wanted
different
more.
characters.
See, this is.
I always want more, but
Yeah,
like,
I know.
but like, I also want to understand if they, like, I know that you as a writer are concise and you care about pacing and how things are going to play out, and I know that you sacrifice stuff.
Yes.
That you really wanted to keep.
Yes. Well, the other thing is always the following from me, which everybody should realize, which is I believe in leaving a party while I'm still enjoying it and you're still enjoying my company, which means I'll end series, right? I will, like, we're done, we're finished. I don't want to put that character back in a main role again. They might show up in the sidelines, but I find it very satisfying. I like the feeling of being full, but not too full. We're ending the meal. We've had our little sweet treat. I always give you a sweet treat at the end. I always end happily, right? And then we're good. But that means, especially when you write with an ensemble cast, that there are some characters that are going to fade, or there are some characters that you, the readers, are going to absolutely love, that you feel I haven't given enough page time to. And sometimes I'll pick them up and spin off a side or something like that. But that's always going to be the nature of the beast, I think, if you write ensemble and if you write found family. Because the point is to build the found family for the main character. And the main character has to stay the main character. Which means, as much as we love the side characters and as much as I try to flesh them out as much as possible, they're side characters. They are there to support the main character, even as found family and even as an ensemble piece. Yes. So, yes, there's always things that I'm like, I wish, like, I really love Tive, and and I'm really fascinated by the idea of their parents and the communal marriage and the medical ship, and like I also wrote, sibling characters that are siblings to each other and love each other and have good relationships with their parents, like it would be really fun to like go in.
But not helpful for him at that moment. He's not going to be able to do that. Like,
but it's not necessary. And I am not George R.R. Martin. I am not writing enormous tomes of thousands and thousands of words where I like deviate and go explore side characters for 4 chapters or whatever.
But
so, yeah.
you will do a thing sometimes where you later are like, I'll write stories about side characters. That is a gift you have given us as fans. It has been wonderful in your Parasolverse.
Yeah.
And I always hope that we'll get revisiting to your other universes.
And I'll say to you all what I always say to everybody, which is, if you want more of a character, say it in a review, because I do read my reviews.
And also buy the books.
Yes.
Review the books.
Review the books, please.
Send them as gifts.
Yes, they're beautiful. Look, these are probably my prettiest books, and they
look beautiful on a shelf after you've read them.
Yes, exactly. They're art, right?
They are art.
The point is,
don't you feel yourself God fixed already?
I'm God fixed, so God fixed. I wore purple. But they are beautiful, and they are a wonderful gift to a sci-fi reader. But I also think it's because if you have someone who's into sci-fi who wants something a little bit less Asimov,
yes,
and more I know what human beings are.
Yes.
And I love that so much.
And aliens. I also know what aliens are.
There's so much we didn't hit.
We didn't hit linguistics. We didn't hit alien creation.
Right, and so...
Do we have a quick fire round
let me
of
see.
questions that we have to get to? For
told
your sake, for those
Yes.
of you who are watching and participating
Yes.
and hopefully enjoying all of this.
Right, I did ask people to throw in some quick fire questions. And I don't see any.
Okay, well,
So
yes, good.
now I'm going to ask my quick ones.
Oh, good.
Unless we get a couple before the Grand Arbiter returns. We have 4 minutes technically left. So that means that all of you, if I see one come up, I will ask it. But in the meantime, so of your linguistic experience creating the dicey language, which we don't hear you describe beautifully.
Yes.
I actually prefer that as a linguist. I'm delighted you did not try to create a language.
No, I'm not going to Tolkienize this.
It's too much. It's very hard.
It's also too much work.
It's so much work. So, what is some feature of the language that particularly tickled your fancy?
The Frozen Register.
Yeah?
Yeah. I love the idea of Frozen Register in general. For those who don't know, it does exist as a concept in languages. It tends to be either an ancient version of a currently living language or the sort of written documentation, bureaucratic language. Some cases, it's the language that's used in poetry and song. And in some cases, bits of the Frozen Register will be picked out and then made part of the living language again. Often through soft power, so often through pop culture. So for example, in Thailand, there were a series of very popular historical dramas, lakorns, and that kind of started to reintroduce a couple of pronouns that were previously Frozen Register and then started getting used in the common parlance again. And this sort of thing is very exciting to me, sort of the organic nature of language, but also the idea that you have a whole part of your language that is kind of not really accessed by people on the street, by the layman. Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, English has some of this in terms of very large words or words that are not taught. And words that are old words, Victorian words. Some of my books are pretty inaccessible for people because I tend to really like those sorts of words.
Yes, same.
Anyway, where were we going with this? Oh, so Frozen Register. And so I just love that it's called Frozen Register for one thing. And then, of course, I used it for the language that the Dicey speak with their adults with. So they use Frozen Register to access the adults. And I'm doing that on purpose because of the word frozen and the hardened carapaces and the idea that the adults are frozen in place as well. They're sort of stuck in the caves. And there's a frozenness to their thought process and their conscientiousness in that they can't think to expand beyond their home planet. Right. And then they also speak in a version of their language that is called Frozen. And so that sort of synergy just made me really happy. It's very juicy as a writer.
It was very juicy as a reader as well. And as a linguist, I was just like, doing so much lifting culturally. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I also had a really good time with the language of Galactic Common, which I had kind of seeded a little bit in previous books and said in the universe, but I'd never really explored more. And I really wanted to lean into the idea that Galactic Common has different registers as well. There's like a diplomat's tongue, because Galactic Common is a language that's been whole cloth assembled for trade and communication across. And like, it isn't Esperanto. It hasn't been completely invented. It's got little bits.
Yeah.
It probably has a source language. But I also wanted to sort of emphasize the fact that it doesn't have the same kind of brutality of English, which I always describe as the Roman Empire of languages. That it still has the sort of delicacy of some of the Asian languages in that there are registers. So, you know, there was probably quite a bit of Mandarin way in its past creation and things like that, so that you end up with this final version of speaking to each other that still has, you have to jump between registers, which Fex does at the very beginning of the book, talking to the Dicey, right? In an effort to like impart his frustration over not being able to just give a drink order.
Just take
Order
your
a beverage.
coffee.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my goodness. So, all right. I'm gonna. Frozen language spreads across the galaxy like an unstoppable glacier, says Charity. Not exactly a question, but a wonderful comment, Charity. Grand Arbiter, I asked a quick question. Would you like to ask one for our wrap up?
Final wrap up.
Final wrap up questions. I know that this was sort of your love song to queer experiences.
Yes.
And we've talked about this personally a lot, talking about the way in which this experience of isolation that Fex experiences is really tied to a queer experience. And that his queerness is not just central to his character, but it is reflective in his physical and emotional experience of the world.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have I know that when I walk away from this, I know that Fex has a lot of work to keep doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts on how? Do you think that you feel that the Dicey ultimately gave him something that were worthwhile? Because my walk away is that he of course questions the value of what he got from the end of it, but ultimately that he cannot imagine life without it.
Yeah, he accepts it. Yeah.
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 And I'm sort of wondering, does that come from a place of your finding your family and finding the people who you want to be connected to?
You asked the hardest darn question. Yeah, of course, without question. But also, I mean, there's no accident that this story of isolation to found family and acceptance is through art, right? I think many of us as queer folks found our weirdo queer companions in the drama club, right?
Yes, yes.
Or the band, or in the art room, or whatever, right? The liminal spaces are often, there's no accident in the Parasol Protectorate universe that it is the creative gene that has excess soul, right? Like I'm being quite brutal with that statement, right? And that it is a lot of the queer people exist in the creative spaces. So you know, like all of the paranormal characters are coded bisexual or pan, right? Like I'm being pretty brutal about this kind of things. So yes, of course it's an allegory, but also that is Fex's journey. Fex's journey is one of putting sort of the Dicey and their agenda aside, him deciding that to open himself up to who he is and who he wants to love and loving in general and being open to sensation and art means allowing the part of him that wants to care for people to do that and to be hurt because of that choice. And to know that the art form that facilitates that is possibly causing damage in the opposite of a physical damage way is kind of the role of accepting the kind of complexities of a queer family and a queer community, that there are going to be damaged costs. There are going to be damaging people in that community, that simply being a queer person does not make you a good person, right?
No.
So yeah, so that is also part of this, and that has been also my kind of personal journey in and out of art and in and out of baby celebritydom and all of those things, right? Is learning that, like, I don't know how else to put it except that Fex's journey is one of learning compassion for his people, but mostly for himself.
Yeah,
So
like
his own self-compassion.
I think
Very important.
that's like one of the interesting dynamics between him and Missif is Missif is learning to do more than take is part of the conversation. And that what that means to, like, as a person who has been forced to take as only his only option, like, the brattiness of Missip is not actual brattiness. It's the only tool in his disposal. It's the only, if everything is, if your only tool is a knife, you only can
use
stab.
a knife. Yeah,
You
exactly.
can only be a brat.
Yeah.
If the only way you're taken seriously is if you're a brat.
And the irony of their dynamic is that the person who is most compassionate to Fex is Missip, right? Missip takes him exactly as he is, with no attempt to change him or do any, like, his coldness, his, like, reserve, his fear of exposure. Missip is just like, I will hurl myself at this rock.
Literally.
I will erode it over time.
Because it's my freaking rock, right?
I love this rock. I shall polish it. I shall hold it.
And in that way, he is like, the rock is the thing. The rock is what I want, right? Like, you don't have to... You don't have to be anything else.
The goal isn't to damage the rock. The goal is to phase through it and be inside it.
Well, Missip is the one who describes Fex as this sort of lonely, isolated place. But Missip is like, that's it. I want to land on you. Like, I want to be you. I want to be you. I want you to be the thing that that it's supporting me, because I've never had any kind of support. And Fex is like, oh, it turns out I'm a great support. Like, I'm actually
I'm
really
an excellent rock.
This is the thing I'm actually best at. Right?
Ladles and rocks.
I know. Albers are going. But you guys understand is that Fex is not a natural performer.
No.
He comes to that as his job in a strange way. He's a natural
Giver.
core. He's a natural holder of other people close to him. And Missip is the first and really the only one initially to immediately identify that in him and be like, oh, okay. And also be self-aware enough in his crazy Mississippi way to be like, and that's what I need. And I'm used to, like, stabbing forward for the thing I need. So I'm going to ice pick this wall. Right?
I think that's, and we can see that in the way that when Fex sees himself, because he, like, as he's talked about it, he talks about a huge amount in the first book and the second book about how he feels so damaged and wronged by the wheel. And that he was it's not tinkered, it's
tinkered. Yeah, he was triggered. Yeah.
And so he sees all of his triggers as sort of like symbols and scars of his own suffering.
Yeah.
And his ability to realize, oh no, these triggers actually make me perfectly suited for the thing that makes me most happy. Being a rock.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, I can, and not just a rock. He's not a rock. He's a wall.
Yeah. And can I talk about, like, favorite, and this is going to be a great way to end, because one of my favorite things about this is that, especially if you read Crudrat and you've been to the wheel and you know anything about the wheel.
Oh my god.
There's a tiny little gimme at the very end of this, which is that Fex is not elite class, and he thinks he is through all three books. He thinks he's progenitor, which is he thinks he's triggered for leadership, because usually it's the progenitor ones that got tinkered with so much, or triggered so hard that they reject the chip and are thrown out of society, right? But it turns out he's Armiger, and Armiger is the warrior class. So Fex, all along, is meant to be a soldier. And what does he get recruited to become? An instrument of peace.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. This is like me and my bows. Right? Like, I do love tying things up in a bow.
Fex is a wonderful gift to me as a reader, but I also think at this moment in time in history, he's a wonderful gift. So if you are, and as I know all of you are actually, avid readers, and you are looking for something that is going to remind you to have hope, and that change can come through art and found family and all the good things that we expect from you. Honestly, Madame Gail, you deliver gifts every time with your books. But this is a wonderful treat for yourselves and just a fantastic
and your
book.
family, and for whoever you'd like to buy it for. Buy many copies.
Look at you two.
Please buy these books.
Buy it's the Christmas gift of the season, a box set. of the Tinkered Starsong.
Right. Start with crab
With
nuts.
a ladle, with the perfect soup
Yes.
ladle.
Tie it up in a bow, put a little ladle on the top. No one will understand until they finish. And they'll be like, oh, I needed a ladle.
Of course I needed a ladle.
A tea
Everyone
ladle.
needs an emotional support
Oh,
ladle.
I want a ladle. So.
We are going to be calling it a night for now. Gail, as always, you are a pleasure and a gift.
And
And
thank you for having me and
Oh
hosting
my
this.
gosh.
Thank you.
Like talking to me. I was thinking before we started how few book groups I actually get to do. And I do love it. I love talking about other people's books in depth, and I love talking about my own, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your wonderful questions as well.
all
Yes,
for being here.
we will see you. We will be back on Friday for a live tea with the ambassador, the Drunk ambassador.
Oh, another one of my favorite people.
Yes, we're going to be
So-
talking
yeah.
about winter dinner.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Ooh, so-
Yes.
For those of you who are here because of me and are into food or Victorian food in particular, the Airship Ambassador is a delight and extremely knowledgeable on the
So
subject.
we'll be back at our regular scheduled time at 6:30 p.m. on Friday.
That's Pacific time. So if you're on the West Coast, Seattle, California, LA, San Francisco, it's that time zone for those of you
What
in
time again?
different countries.
6:30.
6:30 p.m. Pacific.
Yes.
Yeah, very important.
So we'll see you then. Gail, we wait with bated breath for your next step, but we also understand that you just extruded a very large amount of work.
Quite a bit. Yes.
So
there will be more.
We respect and wait patiently on the sidelines
Yes.
to receive, if you so deign to deliver,
Another book.
So-
There will always be more books. This is one thing upon which you can rely.
Thank you. And thank you all. Happy holiday season, my darlings. Thank you for joining us. To those that we just met through Madame Gail, thank you for joining us. We do weird tea and books
Yes.
and nonsense
These
all
are
the time.
two of my favorite people in the world for a reason. You should follow them in their madness and
Please
enjoy
join
it
us.
immensely.
We'd
Yes.
love to have
we'd love
you.
to have you, and we have lots of events.
Yes.
Lots and lots and
Lots of stuff.
Lots. She's filled our schedule so I can suffer with her.
Yes, that's true.
So we will see you soon. We're about to go get some foodums ourselves.
Yes, I get to feed them one more time before they
One
leave me.
final meal.
Exploitation.
Those will be good.
Please
delicious.
get your own meals. Take care of yourselves, as
Yes.
always, as Madame Askew says.
Please
And if you can,
treasure
somebody
yourselves as I treasure you, as I treasure these two. Please treasure yourselves. Take very good care. Wash your hands. Get the good meal. Spend time with friends.
Have a nice rest. Read a good book.
Yeah.
Maybe Tinkered Starsong, now available on Amazon.com.
And Gail's direct website.
Oh, too much.
Words with the
Bye, everybody.